Last time, I remember last time, some of you raised a question regarding Savichara, Nirvichara, Sananda, Nirananda, and different forms of Samapatti. So I want to address those questions at the beginning of the session. First of all, what Samapatti means, that's what I want to make clear. Now, this is a word frequently found in Buddhist literature also. They speak of 8 kinds of Samapatti, which will, in fact, we will have occasion to discuss those different forms of Samapatti according to Buddhist tradition on a later occasion. There are some sutras which may be considered to be a reference to some Buddhist schools of thoughts. Now, this Samapatti is being interpreted in different ways. So, to understand precisely what this means, we have to understand the difference between Samapatti and Samadhi. As you know, Samadhi is the last stage of Ashtanga Yoga. Yama, Niyama, Asana, Pranayama, Pratyahara, Dharana, Dhyana, Samadhi. These are 8 stages, 8 angas of Ashtanga Yoga. And this Samadhi is, of course, the last stage in Ashtanga Yoga. In that stage, the object on which this meditation is practiced, the object of meditation shines in all its effulgence. And this particular experience is called Samadhi Matram. So we have to remember, first of all, what is Samapatti and what is Samadhi. We should know at the very beginning itself that in many books and many commentators' works, the word Samadhi and Samapatti are used to mean the same experience. So the difference is only minimal, and the difference only according to some schools of yoga philosophy. It's not stressed or emphasized in all the commentaries. So that we should remember. Frequently, Samprajnata yoga itself is considered to be different forms which represent different stages in the Samapatti experience. So that will come to that. So as I mentioned, Samadhi, as we understand normally, it corresponds to the highest and the last stage in the Ashtanga Yoga. Now, as I mentioned, at this stage, what happens? The Dhyaya Vastu, or rather the object of dhyana, the object of meditation, shines in all its total effulgence. That means you completely forget, or rather you transcend the limitations of the connection, the limitations arising out of the connections, or maybe the difference between the meditator, the act of meditation, and the object of meditation. There is a convergence. As a result of which, the object of meditation shines in our hearts in all effulgence. And this particular experience in yoga tradition is called Samadhi Matram. And this experience of Samadhi Matram, it's almost like a door opening to what we normally call Samprajnata Yoga, which again is a doorway opening to Asamprajnata Yoga, which is the highest state. Now, it should be also remembered that this Samprajnata Yoga, frequently you should know that it is called Samadhi in the broader sense, itself has many stages. And what are these stages? These stages are already discussed in the 17th Sutra, which we'll discuss now. Vitarka, Vichara, Ananda, Asmita, etc. And of course, correspondingly, you find Vitarka, Nirvitarka, Sasmida, Sananda, Nidananda, and so on. So now, those of you who have got with you the book Samadhi Pada, 70th Sutra, you can take, you can find this sutra. And please remember, I am now addressing the questions raised by some devotees at the last session, because we won't be able to complete that answer. That's why I postponed answering those questions in the present session. Now, in the 17th Sutra of Samadhipada, you find one sutra, Vitarka, Vichara, Ananda, Asmita, Anugama, Samprajnata. That is a sutra. It means this Samprajnata Samadhi, Samprajnata Yoga, which denotes different stages of Samapatti. And this experience is followed or accompanied by Vitarka, Vichara, Ananda, and Asmita. There are 4 terms used here, which are different stages of Samapatti. And now we should remember what are these stages. So this should be made clear, and then you will understand the subtle differences between Vitarka, Vichara, Nirvitarka, Nirvichara, Ananda, Sananda, all will understand. So I wanted to give a complete answer to the question that you raised in last session. So the first stage in this Samprajnata Yoga, that is what's the first stage of Samapatti, is when the meditator, or rather the object of meditation, becomes external objects, gross objects, conditioned by time and space. That means the dhyana or meditation will be focused on external empirical objects, gross objects, which are conditioned by space and time. We know that very well. When we, let's say, when we focus on a tree or mountain or anything, that focus, the object of focus, is necessarily conditioned by the place where you see that mountain or tree, and also the time. And of course, if you extend it, the causation also. There should be some conditioning, which again makes a contributing factor. And this kind of samapatti is called Savitarka Samadhi. Savitarka Samadhi, Savitarka Samapatti, especially in the context of the 17th Sutra. So, what happens? Why is called Savitarka? See, Tarka means logic, analysis, etc. There is an analysis, means you understand things conditioned by the shape of the object, the place where you see, and also the time when you see that object. So in that sense, there is a vitarka there, is a conditioning there. So it is called Savitarka Samadhi or Savitarka Samapatti. Next stage is called Sukshma. Next is called Sthula. So remember, the next stage also is Sthula. Sthula means gross objects, but there is one difference. When you experience, when you focus on the same object, external Sthula or gross objects, without this conditioning of time and space, then it is called Nirvitarka. So in other words, when as a result of this advanced practice of yama, niyama, asana, pranayama, pratyahara, dharana, dhyana, then samadhi, first stage. In other words, the first part of samapatti or samadhi is when you focus on some external gross objects. That is called Sthula Vishayani in Sanskrit. It's a comment of this language. Also, Patanjali's language means external objects. It is called Savitarka, Samapatti, and the same external objects, when you focus on them without the conditioning of time and space, it becomes Nirvitarka. Actually, if a person can focus on any object from memory without the association of Shabdartha Jnana, without the association of some kind of conditioning, then you will be able to remember it. To give an example, this is a simple example. Suppose you see a tree at a particular place. Your first tendency will be to remember, to focus on that tree, and at that stage, you'll be able to focus on that tree only in association with the place where you see the tree, maybe the time when you see the tree, and also maybe other factors, how you reach the place where you saw the tree, and so many factors. Now later on, if you can remember the same object, focusing on it, after dissociating, without association of time and space, you'll be able to remember it better. So as we go from gross to subtle, our ability to remember things becomes sharp. In fact, this explains the ability of yogis to read and remember things even after a long time. So one of the fundamental characteristics of the practice of the practitioner of yoga is a yogi will be able to remember things, not remembering external things, what he reads, what he thinks, all that he will be able to remember. So the natural faculties of mind will increase. There's a journey from gross to subtle, from subtle to more subtle. So in our life also, whatever we do in a subtle manner, we may be doing without any condition. Now the third stage, it's called Savichara. And when you can remember things at a subtle level, at Sukshma Bhudas, within the conditioning, within the conditions of time and space, it is called Savichara. Sukshma, you should remember, every external thing has Sukshma dimension. Every gross object has a subtle dimension. It's called Sthula Bhudas, means external objects. What we see with our eyes, what we experience in the empirical level. It's all constituted by, it all consists of Sthula or external or gross objects. Behind every gross, there is a subtle. It is not visible, but that's a reality. To understand what is subtle, what is gross, I can only give one example because it's a matter of the journey of our own mind as we evolve from gross to subtle. Let us say, for example, the seed is subtle compared to the plant or the tree. The gold asset is subtle compared to the golden ornament, which is made out of gold. The gross always is dependent upon the subtle. That means the sthula is dependent upon sukshma. And sthula cannot exist independent of sukshma. The gross cannot exist independent of the subtle. The golden ornament cannot exist independent of gold. A mud pot cannot exist independent of mud out of which it is made. So, coming back to the subject, what is Savichara? Savichara Samapatti means when you are able to focus on the subtle dimension of things, it is called Savichara Samapatti. And the same focusing samapatti, when done without the association of time and space, kala desha atita it is called, then it is called nirvichara. So that's all. Now comes the subject that you raised in the last session. If you can go beyond these sthula sukshma, these gross subtle equations, and if you can focus on our own pure mind or intellect, which is what we use when we try to focus on something, when that itself becomes the subject of samavati, concentration, then what happens, all the rajogunas and tamogunas disappear. And when tamogunas and rajogunas disappear, what happens? An experience is the result. That experience is called ananda. So this is important. It's a natural, inevitable consequence of freedom from rajoguna and tamoguna. Tamoguna corresponds to inertia, laziness, ignorance, delusion, confusion, conflicts, and so on, dullness, etc. Sleepishness, the physical. Rajoguna corresponds to extreme activity, very often not very sensible activity, but any kind of extreme enthusiasm, dynamism, let's say reckless dynamism, it is called Rajoguna. So when our buddhi or intellect, or maybe you may call it the mental system, when it's freed from dullness and also extreme activity, when it becomes immersed in sattva guna, when there is a abundance of sattva guna corresponds to serenity, peace, and tranquility. And that experience is called ananda. And the samapatti, which is accompanied by this serenity, this calm, quiet attitude, it is called sananda. So now you have got the answer. What is sananda? Sananda is one of the samapattis, one kind of advanced stages of samadhi or concentration in which you get complete freedom from extreme tamoguna and rajoguna, extreme dullness or ignorance, and also you get freedom from extreme activity. And when you actually in your own life, when do you feel a kind of inner serenity and peace and tranquility? When we are able to remain in a state of inner peace, inner fulfillment. It is not a state of inertia, but certainly, obviously, it is not a state of extreme activity. It is a state of serenity. And that state is called sananda. So this should be kept in mind. Remember, these classifications are not accepted by many commentators. Vijnana Bhikshu is the only commentator who divides the samavati into sananda and sasmita, etc. Nirananda, nirasmita, etc. In fact, this is not a common, it's not very common. Vyasa and other of the fundamental commentators are not very much into this kind of classification. It is Vijnana Bhikshu is the only commentator in Yoga Bhashavaarthikam who actually who upholds this view. I mean, there is such a samapatti where you are free from all the rajoguna and tamoguna, where you enjoy this ananda, blissfulness, serenity, and that should be kept in mind. It's only a free small group of yoga philosophers who insist on this kind of experience. So this is the fifth state. The sixth variety of samapatti is called sasmita. What is that? That is beyond all these that we described now, till now, when you feel even going beyond ananda, when you even transcend the feeling of extreme inner bliss. When you go beyond that, you feel, well, aham asmi, the aham vritti, I alone exist. And that is called asmida, and that experience, when you attain a kind of samapatti, samadhi experience, concentration, which is accompanied by this, well, I am, that feeling, ahamasmi, I am, that awareness of our own inner self. It is called sasmida. Sasmida means along with asmida. Asmida means ahamvritti, I am. Sananda means accompanied by Ananda. It means accompanied by inner bliss. So these are the 6 stages in the evolution of Samprajnata Yoga. It's called Samapatti. These are advanced stages on the way towards Asamprajnata Samadhi, which is the highest state. So this is the answer that I wanted to give when some of you raised this question. It is an important thing to remember. It is a gradual evolution. One cannot say one stage is superior or inferior. Gradually, a person evolves towards the state of sasmita. But again, we remember many commentators include this state in some other. For example, Patanjali, of course, according to many commentators, Patanjali has included this Ananda and Asmida, this Ananda and Sasmida Samapatti within the categories of Vichara Samapatti itself. So, in a way, it is some kind of an extension of what we normally call Vichara Samapatti. So, otherwise, Ananda and Asmida do not find a reference in many of the commentators. But the important point, remember, as I mentioned at the beginning of this answer, and also towards the end of the last session when you raised this question, I mentioned in all these experiences, different stages of Samapatti, there is the presence, the inevitable presence of inner peace, inner tranquility, and inner bliss. So in that stage, in that sense, we can say Ananda is an inevitable component of any kind of spiritual practice. So thank you. Now we will come to the next sutra that we are supposed to discuss today. That sutra is 45th one, Sukshma Vishayatvam Cha Alinga Paryavasam. These are some of the more difficult sutras in the Patanjali system. So it requires some cross reference also. So Sukshma Vishayatvam, that it means all Samapattis which belong to the Savichara, Nirvichara categories. They are called Alinga Paryavasanam. They all end, they terminate, they conclude in Pradhanam, Prakriti. That's the meaning. Now, those of you who have got the book, you can refer to, that is the Sadhana Pada, 19th Sutra, where this Alinga word is used. Those Vishesha, Vishesham, Alingam, Alingamatra, Alingani, Gunaparvani, mean Vishesha, Abhishesha, Lingamatra, Alingani. So Vishesha is there, Abhishesha is there, Lingamatra is there, Alinga is there. So Alinga, the word Alinga is used in the 19th Sutra of Sadhana Pada. What it means is Lingamatram. Lingamatram means the first evolute of Prakriti, Pradhana, means Mahatattvam, cosmic intelligence. Alinga means Mula Prakriti itself. So Lingamatram technically means the first stage of Mula Prakriti. That is Mahatattvam. Alinga means Mula Prakriti itself. Now, having kept that in mind, let us say this sutra, Alinga Paryavasana. What it means is all these external objects that are called Sthula Mahabhutas. Now, they all constitute evolutes of effects. It's called Karya. To understand effect of Karya. Karya means effect, the result. To give an example, the tree or the plant is the Karyam or the result. Seed is the Karanam, the Sukshma. Like that. So I'm giving an example. That's all. So what we normally understand by external objects, Sthula Vishayas, they are all external things. Now, above that, above the Sthula Vishaya, they are called Tanmatra, which are Sukshmas, subtle. Then the different senses, mind, Ahankara, and Mahatottam Buddhi. All these constitute practically these evolutes, means they all end in Pradhanam of Prakriti. That's the idea behind Sukshma Shreyatum cha Alinga Parivasanam. All the subtle objects, Tanmatras, mind, different senses, the Jnanendriyas, Karmendriyas, the senses of action, senses of perception, intellect, and the cosmic intelligence, Mahatutvam. All these are evolutes of Prakriti or Pradhana. So, as a result of these Samapatti practices, meditative practices, a person will start his journey back to his own spiritual nature, towards his own spiritual reality. To give an example, well, I can give one, this is the only way to explain this. Let us say normally an average human being, he connects with the external world in his everyday life. Whatever he sees or experiences constitute the reality for him or for her. But when you practice meditation, when you practice, let's say you begin your yoga practices, let's say from Kriya Yoga, Tapas, Swadhyaya, Yisupradhana, and Kriya Yoga. Either you practice Karma Yoga, you practice Bhakti Yoga, either you do some great good things without a selfish motive, or you develop devotional practices, or you just slowly begin your spiritual journey by generating spiritual energy, by giving a spiritual direction to whatever we need. We begin our spiritual journey. We are actually reversing our journey. I mean, right now we are at the empirical level. We consider this world as real. As we practice these spiritual disciplines, we find slowly we begin to feel, well, all these things are not eternal. It is natural for everyone. Even when we read a great book on philosophy, or when we do any noble deed, or when we practice any noble activity, slowly our mind begins to evolve. Our mind is generating spiritual energy. Slowly our focus and attention are drawn away from the external things. We slowly begin to believe that this world, with all the enjoyments and pleasures, is not the only thing I should care for. There are higher things that I should care for. There are higher values, higher things I should focus on to make my life more meaningful. There are other interesting and greater things worthwhile, higher values to develop. This feeling naturally comes when we practice spiritual disciplines. In other words, we are actually turning back towards our own spiritual nature, we are beginning a journey back to our own spiritual nature. And then slowly, as we evolve further and further, we will be able to go beyond the senses, beyond the mind, and finally beyond the ecosystem ahankaras. And of course, eventually we reach Mahatattva, the higher purified intellect level. And finally, we will reach reach the Pradhana level, Prakriti level. That's the beginning of evolution. You should remember, I already explained at the beginning of the session. Yoga philosophy, it takes its metaphysics, its logic, and its epistemology all from Sankhya system. And according to Sankhya system, there are two fundamental categories: Pradhana, that is Prakriti, another name, and Purusha. Purusha is our natural state. Purusha is effulgent. Purusha is never bound. Purusha is eternal. That's our true nature, true identity. Prakriti is Jada. It is non-effulgent. And from Prakriti, we slowly start our descent, downward journey. We reach the intellect level, then we reach ego level, from Mahatattva, then Ahangara, from Sattvika Ahangara, mind emerges. So Rajasic Ahangara, Indriyas or senses, and of course from Tamasic Ahangara, the Panchatmantras and the external objects, Panchamahabhutas. So like that, we start our descent through evolution, and yoga practice helps us to reverse the journey. It's called Pradiprasava in the yoga language. It means counter evolution or journey back to our own true nature. So that's why, as a result of these samapatis, practicing the samapatis, Patanjali says, Alinga Paryavasanam. We end with Alingam. Alingam here means Pradhana Prakriti. Next stage is we understand and realize our true nature. Prakriti is not our true nature. Purusha, effulgence is our true nature. So here we have to connect yoga with Vedanta. As we evolve further and further in our life, slowly we start this ascent. It may take several life cycles according to yoga and Vedanta and Buddhism, not just in one life or in one set of activities. It is a slow process. As we evolve further and further, we move our journey back to our own true nature, and eventually we realize our identity with Atma. So that is the end, that is Paryavasana. That is a real end. But before that, there is a penultimate end, that is Alinga Paryavasana. So after reaching this, you have to connect yoga with Vedanta. That's what Swami Vivekananda was the first exponent of yoga philosophy in English language. Swamiji connects yoga with Vedanta. Without connecting with Atman, you won't be able to reach a logical conclusion of yoga psychology and yoga philosophy. Now, the next sutra is Ta Eva Sabija Samadhi. Tamit Taha, which is the Strilinga, is the feminine gender, plural. All these Samapattaya, all these different stages of Samapattis, they constitute Sabija, meaning they constitute Sabija Samadhi. That's the meaning. Ta Eva Sabija Samadhi. It's called Samprajnata Samadhi. What it means is, here we are not coming to the end of our bondage. Vijaya means see. We have actually gone beyond the samskaras, beyond murtis, but that stage of freedom of going beyond the samskaras and murtis is not final. It's just like there are samskaras, but they are completely kept under control or restrained. That explains the reason why many great spiritual seekers. And not only spiritual seekers, we can find the stories of saints. After advancing some distance, suddenly you find they, they somehow fall out of the track. That's because samskaras are there. When samskaras are held in check, and when you are always surrounded by positive environments, circumstances, then samskaras do not connect. See, if you walk in a field which is very fertile, and if you have seeds in your pockets in a package, a plastic zip package, if the seeds do not fall on the fertile land, they will not sprout. Or if you don't go to the fertile land, if you just stay in your room, then also the seeds will be there in your pockets. But when you actually hold those seeds in your hands, and then you walk in a fertile land, and if the seeds happen to fall from your hands, then they will sprout. Similarly, when we are able to restrain our samskaras and impressions to some extent, through all these spiritual practices, yoga practices, and so long as we keep ourselves away from negative or harmful circumstances which are conducive to trouble and problem. If you are keeping yourself away from them, you are safe. But if somehow you happen to connect with the appropriate circumstances which can cause these samskaras to sprout, there will be trouble. So we can find this. I cannot explain this better than giving the story of Jadabharana. It's a classic story in the Bhagavad Purana, the devotion classic. Jadabharana is the name of a great emperor named Shiva. And he practiced a lot of meditation. And then when he reached middle age, he thought, well, now this is enough, I should retire. I should go to some holy place. He went to the bank of the river. He built a thatched hut and he started staying there, spending his time in meditation, contemplation, reading scriptures, taking holy names, mostly engaging in spiritual disciplines. And one day what happened, as he was sitting on the banks of the river, because he had built his hermitage on the bank of the river, something happened. A female deer was running out from a forest and is being chased by a lion. The female deer was frightened, scared, and it jumped away a small stream. In the process, because of the extreme effort, he gave birth to a tiny deer child, baby deer, and the female deer died. Now the king was watching on this. He was a compassionate person, a great man. So he plunged into the river. He saved the little animal, the baby deer. And the baby deer began to grow in his hermitage. And he began to look after the baby deer, giving it food, grass, and saving it from wild animals, from lions and tigers. So he considered his duty, sacred duty, to look after the baby deer. So you can remember, the king had his own children and grandchildren in his palace. And he had the responsibility of running a kingdom. He gave up all these responsibilities and he actually went into the forest and started living in a hermitage on the banks of the river in the forest. So gradually, you know what happened? Because of this incident that we narrated just now, his mind deviated from his own spiritual disciplines. So he forgot to meditate, which used to practice every day, used to practice meditation every day for decades. and he forgot to read holy books. And his whole time he spent on looking after this tiny animal. So what happened, when we became very old, it was time for him to die. So the little baby deer was walking and playing around near the hermitage. He was looking at this tiny animal. Oh, if I'm gone, who will look after this baby deer? Maybe some wild lions, tigers, wild animals from the forest may kill and eat the little animal. So he began to cry and weep and worried, and he died. Now remember, instead of showing compassion to the animal, at the same time continuing his own spiritual disciplines, what happened was his mind deviated away from his own spiritual disciplines. He began to spend his time absorbing looking after an animal. So the great king and emperor, who had left everything, who had renounced everything to realize his spiritual, to follow his spiritual enlightenment, to realize God, his mind was taken away, just dragged away from the thought of contemplation of God, and got completely immersed in the thought of taking care of a pet animal. So compassion is good. Kindness is very important. Every sage, every spiritual seeker will be invariably compassionate. With compassion to animals, kindness to animals, compassion to fellow human beings, even for the ecosystem, is a natural characteristic of every spiritual seeker. Anyone who meditates will automatically be introspective and compassionate and wise in a very transcendental sense. But at the same time, along with that, what happened in his case, Jadabharata's case was that his mind drifted away from his own spiritual thoughts, spiritual responsibilities. So when he was born again after death, he was born as a deer. But one difference, when he was born as a deer, that animal did not live like other animals. It remained confined to that little hermitage. He stayed there, never moved out. It did not associate with other animals. And it was thinking about its own past. I was a great king in my previous life. Unfortunately, I had this deviation. So I had to be born again as a deer. So as the king died thinking of a deer, the deer died thinking of God. So what happened? Because the deer did not lose its previous samskaras, its previous thoughts, previous tendencies. He remembered its own past. It was a great king. The animal was a great king in the past, was a great devotee, but unfortunately there was a deviation, wavering of mind. And he died thinking of a deer. He was born as a deer, and then he remembered its own tragedy, deviation from the thought of God. So he went on contemplating on God. And in the next life, this deer was born as a great sage, completely immersed in meditation. He had some brothers who were very worldly. They took him all his wealth, drove him away from his home. He didn't mind. He went on living as a wild man. But within his heart, he was meditating. He was a great philosopher. He was a realized person. He was a spiritually enlightened person like a Buddha. And then, of course, he happened to meet a king. On the way, the king, of course, he was hired to carry a palanquin by a group of palanquin bearers who were employed by a king. The king came to know this man is a strange man. He's not like other people. So, and he asked him, he was not very regular in bearing the palanquin. So the king scolded him, "Why are you shaking? Why are you not responsible? Then the palanquin bearer was the deer in his previous life and a king, a devoted king in his still previous life. Whom are you asking this question? My body or my atma? And what's the end of the journey? Where are you going? You are going in this channel. Where is your destination? The king had read all the Upanishads and scriptures, so he realized this palanquin bearer is not an ordinary hired handyman. He's a great philosopher, he's a great sage. The king go down from this palanquin, go down to this great person. Who are you? You ask this question. You don't look like you don't. Your words don't sound like the words of a normal person. You must be a great yogi, a great spiritual man walking incognito. Then there is a long dialogue between Jadabharata and the king, the Guga, in the Bhagavad Gita. And that discussion, that debate is one of the most classical debates on the higher spiritual philosophy. So what this means is, as we evolve, we may reach this pradhana state, but we have to go beyond that. But one important point is, whatever we do in one life, it will never be lost. Whatever we do, even a little bit of spiritual practice, we will inherit the wealth of the spiritual heritage. Whatever we have done, we will reap the harvest in the coming life. So that's why people sometimes we find some very blessed persons, right from their birth, they have an introspective mind. And some of them may develop this introspective mind, maybe when they are 20 years, and then 30 years, and then 50 years, and then even beyond that. At some stage or other in their life, suddenly they develop this thirst for the higher, this desire to know the transcendental. They start thinking that life is not just all about having a good job, plenty of money, plenty of wealth, but there is something higher in life, higher than what money can bring. So that thought is an indication of the fact that you have done something to deserve this higher philosophy. So that's an important thing to remember. So now the point is, so long as we have done some spiritual practice, there are good seeds, good tendencies, good samskaras in our mental system. But there are also, unfortunately, sometimes some wrong, undesirable tendencies stored up in our mental system. That is something we have to remember. Our mind is a bundle of seeds, good seeds and bad seeds. So first of all, we should try to cultivate those good deeds, good seeds, good samskaras. And then what happens when we have an abundance of positive samskaras, then we will have a natural tendency to practice spiritual disciplines. And as a result of these spiritual disciplines, maybe for several life cycles, we go through these 6 stages of samapatti we already discussed earlier. That is Savitarka samapatti, Nirvitarka samapatti, Savichara, Nirvichara, Sananda, and Sasmita. Through all these 6 stages of samapatti, we may reach the stage where the seeds are completely gone. They're totally free. Or the seeds get fried. See, when you have seeds, you have fried the seeds in a pan with some masala or oil, and you keep in your pocket. And if those seeds fall in a fertile soil, nothing will happen. So that stage is called Nirbij Samadhi. So 46th Sutra tells you that all these forms of Samapatis are different stages in the Samprajnana Yoga, and that's a highway leading to Nirbija Samadhi or Asamprajnana Yoga. Now we can have interaction. You are most welcome to ask questions. I want to ask you before asking the questions, am I audible? Because we have affected some changes in our system here. Bobby, everything is audible?
Yes, I can hear you. I can hear you quite well.
Because during this transition, we have to open this auditorium for in-person programs. So we have to change the system, the arrangement. Okay. Yeah.
I didn't see any questions on YouTube. I wasn't able to check Facebook, and I don't see any hands up at the moment.
Thank you. That's a good sign that we have all the questions answered. Yeah, thank you. So in that case, we'll conclude. So I should again remind all the friends and devotees who are listening to us, especially those who are from the neighborhood of San Francisco, that from today onwards, we have reopened the temple. All our Sunday lectures and Bhagavad Gita classes are in-person programs. Sunday lectures will be held in the new temple, 2323 Village Street, San Francisco. And Friday classes on Bhagavad Gita at 7:30 on Friday will be held in the old temple, that is the corner between Filbert Street and Webster Street, and 2963 the address. And those who come for this Bhagavad Gita class from next Friday onwards, please remember you are stepping into the first Hindu temple outside Asian continent. It is the first Hindu temple, the regular temple structure in the Ramakrishna order. It was completed in 1905. It was inaugurated, dedicated in January 7th of 1906. And you should also remember, you're stepping into the first Hindu temple in the West, outside Asian continent. There was not one Hindu temple anywhere in the West when this temple was being built in 1905. You can imagine what a historical and important place. It's considered to be one of the landmark buildings in San Francisco. Is considered to be one of the most precious architectural legacies of this great city. So most welcome all of you from next Friday onwards. I think it is 22nd of this month, I think, October. So please enter the hall from Filbert Street. The temple is located in the corner between Filbert Street and Webster Street. Thank you. Namaskar.
Thank you, Swamiji.
Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Om Tatsat. Sri Ram Krishna Pranamastu. And before we conclude, I want one more suggestion I want to give. Those of you have got a copy of the Bhagavad Gita, if you bring, it will be very helpful to you, because we are going through complete exhaustive discussions here, and you're most welcome to ask questions. Those who have got a textbook with you, any textbook, any text for the matter, will be okay. You can bring. Thank you. Namaskar.